City, Boomer Von Cannon, WBT.
Huh? It's 5:05 and welcome into a Tuesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. Well, the votes appear to be in for the North Carolina Supreme Court race between Democrat incumbent Allison Riggs and Republican challenger Jefferson Griffin, 14 days after Election Day. Though two counties had not fully certified their results as of late yesterday, with over 5.5 million votes casted in the statewide contest, the Democrat Riggs now leads Jefferson Griffin by 623 votes, or 0.10% in that race. In 2016, North Carolina saw a statewide recount for a state auditor's race that resulted in a net gain of 49 votes, and in 2020, a statewide recount for the Supreme Court gained a net of 5 votes for Democrats. So while recent history would suggest that Griffin's deficit is insurmountable, this race undoubtedly will go to a recount, which will likely take weeks. Could be until parts of mid-December till we get details on that. With that, the North Carolina Supreme Court candidate and the state Republican Party are now seeking a temporary restraining order against the North Carolina State Board of Elections. Griffin and the NC GOP argue in their lawsuit out yesterday that election officials have failed to turn over public records that Griffin has requested as he considers whether to file a protest and seek a recount, which, by the way, has to be done by the end of business today against Democrat Allison Riggs. We'll continue to track that throughout the morning. That's our top story this morning. A race in Griffin led by 10,000 votes the day after the election has been whittled all the way down. The Democrat Riggs now leads by 623 votes. More details on that coming up. It's now 5:07 on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Now 2 weeks removed from Election Day, and we are still tracking results across the Tar Heel State. To get some more details on that this morning, Andy Jackson with the John Locke Foundation joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Andy, we chatted yesterday morning about the county canvass process. That went on Friday for most counties. Some counties spilled over into the weekend and on Monday. And as we sit here this morning, a razor-thin margin in the North Carolina Supreme Court race, lawsuits flying, recount deadlines. There is a lot going on 14 days removed from the election.
Yeah, there is, and it's unfortunate that it's come to this. We know that there's been struggles from a lot of county boards this time around about how they're reporting their data, the timeliness of the information. Part of that is that we have a little bit of looseness with rules about when some forms of data need to be reported. And so that has helped sown confusion, I think unnecessarily, because there are some things you just can't do until the end, like provisional ballots. But there are other things these county boards could have been doing, such as counting the mail ballots. They could have done that a long time ago and gotten that out of the way so that we're really focused on a relatively small number of ballots these last couple of days.
So those line shares of ballots that we're talking about, these, for most counties outside of a couple, these were ballots that came in on Election Day before 7:30. So these county boards had them in their possession, but some of these counties waited until, Thursday or Friday of last week to even begin the process on those ballots? Why was there a delay there? Is there some reason that they wait that long to do so?
Well, it's left to their discretion. So if they want to wait until the county canvass or the day before the county canvass to do that, they can do so. I don't know why they would want to backlog that work when they know they've got to deal with all these provisional ballots and with the military and overseas ballots that can come in up to 9 days after Election Day. So they're really creating work for themselves on the back end and also making it a little more confusing for voters because they're saying, well, we have these ballots. They're in. You can count them. Why don't you count them? Why don't we know the results from those earlier? And so I think it's really unfortunate what at least some of these counties have chosen to do with when they're going to report the results of the Election Day absentee ballots.
And let me ask you this. We know election integrity has been a hot conversation starting at the 2020 election cycle. Some good reforms have been made here in North Carolina. However, I can't completely fault people for being confused, frustrated, and skeptical how a Supreme Court race changes by over 10,000 votes, in some cases more than 2 weeks after the election cycle. Does that, in your opinion, does that allow the sowing of distrust to continue in regards to election, even when there's nothing nefarious necessarily afoot?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that clearly there are some things that cannot be helped. We know how the data is processed. We know generally in North Carolina, where on election night, we're a red shift state, and it's going to start a little more Democratic on election night usually, and then progressively become a little more Republican over it. It was a little different this time around, where it kind of got really red really fast, and then back to blue, and then finally Republicans in some cases came out on top. And traditionally, at least in the last couple of cycles, because Democrats disproportionately use mail ballots, we do know that the ballots that are counted after Election Day tend to go a little more blue. We saw that in the state Supreme Court Chief Justice race in 2020. Paul Newby started with about a 3,000 vote lead, and that got down to around 400 votes by the time they got to the canvasses and then the recount. And so we're seeing something here, but it's bigger this time, and that's the issue here, and it's unnecessarily bigger because we knew that those mail ballots were going to go, mostly Democratic, and they could have gone ahead and gotten that out of the way so that we don't have this sudden flip at the end. And I think that's what voter will potentially confuse or anger voters about this process, and I think it unnecessarily antagonizes folks when you don't get stuff done when you can get it done.
No question about that. So we're likely to see a recount requested in this North Carolina Supreme Court race. The deadline is going to be 5 o'clock today on Tuesday for candidates statewide to file that. We'll likely see that in the Supreme Court race. What does that process look like? Do you recount all 5.7 million ballots in the state, Andy? What is that going to look like over the next days and weeks?
Well, they're going to do a machine recount. And it's possible they'll end up with a hand-eye recount. There's also a normal partial hand-eye recount that they do anyhow, but that's just for the presidential race. So if there's some problems seen there, that might trigger the counting everything all over again. And so this takes a couple of weeks. I think in 2020, that recount took us to the first or second week of December. So this will take us some more time. And when it's all said and done, we might be several weeks out before we actually have a final winner in that state Supreme Court race, which is important. It doesn't really determine, which group controls the state Supreme Court, but it could set things up. It really determines whether or not Democrats have a shot about retaking the court in 2028 or not. Because if Riggs wins here, the only race that's up in 2 years is Anita Earls, who's an incumbent Democrat. But then there's a couple of Republican-held seats that are going to be in 28. So, this is pretty high stakes, if not today, then down the road for both parties. And I'm expecting they're both going to be calling the lawyers and are going to be fighting tooth and nail about every ballot.
You mentioned those recounts. So if I'm understanding you correctly, so they'll, in all 100 counties, they'll rerun all of those ballots through. Will they just be looking at that Supreme Court race, or will that be the case for every other race that's on that ballot as well?
No, that'll just be the Supreme Court race. All the other races are called, there may be some local races they'll have to recount as well. But as far as statewide, it's just going to be that one. That makes it a little easier for the officials when they're running through there. And I'm guaranteeing you, because I've been involved in a recount before, both parties will have people in those county board offices making sure things are done correctly.
Lots of great information this morning. We appreciate it. Andy Jackson from the John Locke Foundation joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:14, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time to get a look at traffic this morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Thank you, Nick and North.
It's 521. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on a Tuesday edition. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. The North Carolina General Assembly back in Raleigh this morning, where they are likely to override Governor Roy Cooper's veto of House Bill 10, which passed in September. And Cooper is now using the situation out west, of course, devastation and destruction from Hurricane Helene, to make his case against the Opportunity Scholarship Program. The General Assembly is expected to gavel back in at noon today and override HB 10, which includes budget adjustments, requires sheriffs to cooperate with U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. That's a big deal for Mecklenburg County and Sheriff Gary McFadden, and funding to clear the waitlist for the Opportunity Scholarship Program. Governor Roy Cooper said in a press release, quote, "Helene was the most devastating storm our state has ever seen, and there is a long and extensive road of recovery ahead for Western North Carolina. Legislatures should invest billions of dollars in Western North Carolina's recovery instead of locking billions of dollars in for private school vouchers." Those are the comments from the governor. Roughly 55,000 students are on the waitlist for the Opportunity Scholarship Program, or state-funded education vouchers. They are awarded to families on a sliding scale based on the household income, with lowest families being served first. In February, earlier this year, 72,000 applications were received for the scholarship program, which did break records of years past. The waitlisted families were left hanging earlier this summer when the General Assembly failed to fully fund that program. We will likely see that coming up a little bit later on today. And of course, we'll have details over at carolinajournal.com and coming up for you tomorrow morning here on the Carolina Journal News Hour with that discussion of funding out west. A busy day in the North Carolina General Assembly yesterday. It's now 5:23 on the Carolina Journal News Hour. A situation going from bad to worse yesterday in the North Carolina General Assembly involving the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency. They needed $175 million additional dollars. That number is now over $220 million. Brianna Kramer from the Carolina Journal was in the room yesterday as that hearing took place. Brianna, good morning to you. Appreciate the time. Give us an overview of what you learned yesterday out of the General Assembly.
Yes. Hey, Nick. The North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency, that's the state agency tasked with assisting victims of natural disasters and home repairs after any kind of devastation here in North Carolina. That state agency admitted during a committee meeting on Monday that it actually faces a $221 million shortfall rather than the $175 million budget deficit that was previously reported. So during the subcommittee meeting on hurricane response and recovery, state legislators slammed the state agency for 2 hours. They questioned top officials that report to Governor Roy Cooper, his staffers, and they were questioned about financial mismanagement. The director of this agency admitted that her team was not watching closely enough. She admitted that it was her responsibility and they were not watching overall the budget lines as well as they should have been, which is definitely a problem in this situation. And they are requesting the General Assembly to continue helping them fund so that they can continue relief efforts, not from Hurricane Helene, but dating all the way back to 2017, Hurricane Florence and Hurricane Matthew is still what we're focusing on with this issue here.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. Obviously, Helene about 7 or so weeks ago, still on everybody's mind. We're not even there yet, Brianna, and we've got these storms from 2017 and 2018 that are still on the minds. I want to go back to something that you just mentioned, and unfortunately, most of our audience is probably not surprised to hear that a government agency wasn't watching something as closely as they should have. But in this case, this office was spun up essentially with, from what I understand, one job and one job only, and they weren't following that closely. Brianna begs the question, what were they doing if they weren't doing this?
Right. That's a good question to be asking. So yeah, this agency was created in 2018 primarily to oversee the distribution of around $780 million in federal recovery funds, which was allocated to North Carolina in response to Hurricanes Matthew and Florence. So that is why this agency even is a thing to this day. But they continue to have this financial mismanagement and a lot of questions about their response to these natural disasters from quite a long time ago. So on top of the $2.1 million per month of temporary relocation assistance that they're paying for displaced individuals, they're also behind on contractor payments, which is kind of shocking to the contractors and builders that are continuing to build houses for these victims. And so they're not even paying these contractors like they should be. They apparently owe $37.6 million in outstanding invoices. And apparently they're currently paying $5 million per week.
Well, astonishing numbers there. As we learned in October last month, there was still some 1,600 people, again, not from Western North Carolina, not from Helene, 1,600 people in portions of Eastern North Carolina that were impacted by Hurricane Matthew and Florence that were still dealing with not having homes or not having whatever structure they were living in fully up and operational. Did we get any new update on that number and where things stand right now with these folks from Matthew and Florence?
Yes, there was a little bit that they touched on. The agency still has 1,400 homes pending construction with 766 families currently in the rebuilding process. They talked about the temporary placements they put families in. Some families lived in hotels for over 6 months, they said. Wow. And so, yeah, they continue to apparently help some families and victims out and put them in temporary housing from way back then, which is quite a shock. If we look to South Carolina and their response from the same storms long ago, they were well on their way to recovery many years ago.
So I guess, Brianna, the question is, what do we do from here? This is not the first time that this committee this group, again, under the governor, no oversight of the General Assembly, has been in the crosshairs of the General Assembly. It seems like it's a similar trick and pony show that they pull out every time. Did we get any calls for resignation, anything coming out of that hearing?
Oh, yes, we certainly did. Legislators were in a very serious mood, I'd say. They were pretty angry and fed up with the continuous need to hold these committee meetings, to hold these government officials under Governor Cooper accountable. So Representative Brendan Jones, he represents Robeson County, he asked if the director would resign today. And she did admit responsibility. And that's why he asked, okay, will you resign? And she said, that is for the governor to decide. No, sir, I will not resign today. So there were calls for that. And other legislators were expressing their distrust in this agency. What are they doing with the money? And what do you need more money for at this point? You can't even manage the money you have, clearly. So it doesn't give them a whole lot of confidence and confidence for their constituents back home. And so even Representative Jake Johnson said that at least, he hopes that they learn something from this, and going forward, we've got to look at some major reforms to this and how this process is administered, because the General Assembly, has seen this play out for years on end. And, maybe it's time that they get involved and do something about this mismanagement.
You can read more on Brianna's story by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com. It was a brutal hearing yesterday in Raleigh. We'll have some audio on that coming up here in just a couple of minutes. 529 News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Time for another look at your roadways on a Tuesday morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick.
right, hot.
It's 5:36. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. Good Tuesday morning to you. We are streaming live on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel. You can take the show with you on your own time by checking out the Carolina Journal News Hour podcast wherever you get your podcasts or by visiting WBT.com and clicking on the podcast tab. Well, the votes do appear to be in 14 days after Election Day for North Carolina Supreme Court race between Democrat incumbent Allison Riggs, who was appointed to that position and seat by Democrat Governor Roy Cooper, and Republican challenger Jefferson Griffin. As of this morning, we are tracking over 5.54 million ballots cast in that statewide contest, and the Democrat Riggs now leads Republican challenger Griffin by 623 votes, or 0.01%. That is a very close race. Judge Griffin had a 10,000 vote lead on November the 6th, one day after the election. That entire lead has been dwindled down as provisional and absentee by mail ballots across the state were counted and tallied, and it is now Democrat Riggs that leads it by 623 votes. With that, the North Carolina Supreme Court candidate in Griffin, as well as the North Carolina Republican Party, are seeking a temporary restraining order against the State Board of Elections. Griffin and the NCGOP argue in the lawsuit that election officials have failed to turn over public records that Griffin had requested, as whether he considers to file protests and seek a recount in the election. The deadline for seeking a recount would be later on today. Close of business on Tuesday, 5 o'clock is when those need to be in. An election board spokesperson responded to the Carolina Journal's request for comment and called the lawsuit, quote, thoroughly unnecessary. As this continues to go on, there is likely to be a lot of lawfare in this race, with some of these provisional and absentee by mail ballots that were counted over the last 14 days. We've heard from past recounts, whether that be the 2016 statewide auditor recount or the 2020 Supreme Court Chief Justice recount. This will likely go on for weeks. We likely will not know the final result of this recount, depending on how this gets brought up in court, until sometime close to Christmas. So if you were hoping that all of the election talk would subside here 2 weeks from the election, unfortunately, you're going to have to wait at least a couple of more weeks. We'll continue to track those details each and every morning, 5 to 6 a.m., right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it is now 5:39. Turning our attention to Raleigh, the state capital, as lawmakers begin a couple of day session today. Before they gavel in around noon today, it was yesterday in which the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency, the state agency that was spun up by Governor Roy Cooper in 2018 and was tasked with assisting victims of natural disasters, admitted during a committee meeting yesterday that they are $221 million in the red, and that is higher than their $175 million budget deficit that was previously reported. The agency admitted to a massive hole in their disaster recovery budget, even though North Carolinians impacted by Hurricane Florence are still without permanent housing. Some victims have had to stay in hotels for over 6 months, as of we learned yesterday in the committee hearing, and waiting over a year to return to permanent housing. One of the most shocking things we learned is that this organization employs over 200 employees, and they have seemingly miserably failed in their goal. It was a heated, over 2-hour committee hearing in Raleigh yesterday. We'll start off with some clips this morning, heading over to Representative Stevens about the budget as a whole and some of the questions she asked of the NCOR representative.
And currently you're 56% of our budget. Does that sound right?
No, our entire budget for the 3 grants that we have is $981 million. That is for all of the things that we do.
And how much of that have you spent?
We have obligated all of it except for the $44 million that we are seeking to move within our own envelope.
Okay. Then I'm going to go back to something. I think in one of these reports you said that there was $37.6 million not available to pay for things that have already been built.
They are outstanding invoices that have come in over the past few months. So we've been paying at $5 million a week.
And if you encumbered the money as soon as you let the contract, why is the money not there for this $37.6 million? Maybe I need to understand your definition of encumber.
We simply were not watching carefully enough. We were going fast and not watching carefully enough on the encumbrances. But we do have money that we can move within our own envelope. It's what we're saying to you all is that we can move money, but we'd have to break commitments. And at this point, we have not wanted to break commitments like the 5 commitments that we have to affordable housing in Eastern North Carolina. We can move more money if we are starting to break commitments to other projects.
Not watching carefully enough, that nothing that you want to hear from your state government, especially an organization like the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency, which was set up with one job and one goal to provide relief to individuals in Eastern North Carolina dealing with the impacts of Hurricane Helene and Matthew. That back and forth right there showing that contractors, in this case small businesses that are operating, not being paid as of right now. They continue payments but have about $37 million in outstanding invoices as those continue to rack up. We also had some other questions about the timeline, the replacement. When will these individuals finally be back in their homes? Senator Jarvis asked that question.
So you've got 1,400 more homes. You've only completed 2,800 in how many years has this been now? 6, 8?
So we received the Hurricane Florence money in 2020, and we began building in earnest. As you all know from testimony here, 2022 was not a very fast year for us. 2023 is really where the pace started picking up.
I just don't see how the numbers add up that you can get done basically almost with whatever funding you have requested based on your past history.
And the past history was really the question that was brought forward as lawmakers decide and try and figure out how they are going to handle unimaginable relief out in Western North Carolina from the impacts and devastation of Helene. Do they want to trust this organization, NCORE as it's known, the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency, set up in 2018 under Governor Roy Cooper, to handle that work going forward? A valid question asked by lawmakers. We'll have some additional clips coming up here in just a few minutes that ask that question point blank. How should we trust you to handle this position and this operation going forward? A very heated meeting in Raleigh yesterday. Some more audio on that coming up. It's 544, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get another look at traffic this morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thanks a lot, Nick. And
99.3
WBT.
Hancock's Bikes for Kids is back. Every child should experience the joy of receiving a new bike, so please join the spirit of giving started by John Hancock over 31 years ago and donate a new bike for a child in need this Christmas. On Friday, December the 8th, we'll be here at WBT, that's 1 Julian Price Place in Charlotte, to accept your donations of a new bike and say hello. It's the 31st annual WBT Hancock's Bikes for Kids, presented by Garage Door Doctor, Friday, December 6th from 5 to 9 p.m. here at WBT. You can find out more details by visiting our website, WBT.com. 5:51, the Carolina Journal News Hour, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We continue to go over some details yesterday out of a very contentious meeting of the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency. Leaders from that group and organization were in front of a joint legislative committee on government operations, specifically the subcommittee on hurricane response and recovery, and they slammed the organization known as ENCOR during an over 2-hour committee meeting during which Cooper's staffers were also there to be questioned about their financial mismanagement. It even got to the point where the head of this organization was asked to resign. Take a listen.
Looks like it's going to cost about $980 million. You guys came to us for $530. We've already talked inflation. We've done that. The original budget was for $530 million thereabout. So it's about a $450 million difference now. You just said you were at fault. So are you going to admit to this committee today that this is your fault that this ENCOR is in this situation?
I should have been watching more carefully, but I want to make sure we're talking about the right numbers. What we requested of the federal government after Florence was $1.1 billion.
Are you telling the committee, I want to get very clear right now, very specific, is it your fault where we are with the numbers?
Yes, sir. This is my
Will you turn in your resignation today, please?
That is for the governor and for DPS.
I'm asking you, as this committee, having met with you several times, and I am frustrated, you can tell, will you turn in your resignation today if you're admitting your fault?
Sir, I believe that we have done what we can to come to solve the problem.
Yes or no, please?
No, sir, I will not resign.
Okay, then committee, I think we've got a lot of work to do, but
That's Representative Brandon Jones talking to the director of ENCOR, Laura Hogshead, and asking for her resignation. She said no, even admitting the fault was on her head and they were not watching the money as closely as they should have been. As that committee meeting wrapped up, we heard from the chairman of this oversight commission, or this oversight committee, Brent Jackson, on how do we go forward with trusting you as an organization to potentially handle the devastation out in western North Carolina caused by Hurricane Helene.
I'm going to ask this point-blank question. Why in the world, with your past history, not you personally, but ENCOR's past history, would we as the legislature give the West to y'all to handle this project out there? Why?
Sir, I don't want another entity to have to learn all those hard lessons again. And humbly, I would say we have learned them. And what you all saw in North Carolina after Floyd was a structure that worked and then disbanded and then was not in place when Matthew and Florence hit. There was simply too long between storms for North Carolina to maintain that expertise. I would submit that ENCOR has that expertise today. We've made all the mistakes, we've corrected all of those mistakes, and now we know what not to do, and we know how to do the things that we need to do for the West earlier and better. The key is the funding. The key is getting the federal funding quicker and making sure that the applications are working together with FEMA, but I think we're on that path. So the reason to keep ENCOR is because simply we've done this recently, and to start over with someone else would mean having to relearn some of those hard lessons.
Relearning some of those hard lessons is the argument that they make, as more than 1,400 individuals still remain, or 1,400 homes, not individuals, still remain kind of up in the air as this group continues to struggle with getting contractors to get work done and the process and the timelines for all of this. Back to Representative Brendan Jones, his closing remarks scathing on ENCOR and how they should be handled going forward.
Why would we give you the West? That's my recommendation to this committee, that we don't give it. You guys are like a comedy of errors. It's the same thing each time you come in here. Hey, we've screwed up. When are you going to get it right? I mean, we've given you every opportunity. We've given you every tool you've asked for. I mean, if you were a business coming to my bank asking for money, I certainly wouldn't loan you anything because you've proven that you do not have the capability of being trusted with the taxpayers' money. So I'm just asking you, would you trust you? Would you let you go forward? Briar, I'm like you, man. It's my people. Those are my people out of their homes. But at the end, if you want to carry it up to the chain to the governor, y'all have failed miserably. There's no reason we're where we're at today. This should have been wrapped up. And we've given you every opportunity and gave you every dollar you've ever asked for. And it's going to be hard for this committee to swallow and go back to our respective chambers and ask for this money. No one has any more sympathy or empathy for the people of this state that are affected by the storms than I do. I have to live with them every day. You don't have to go to the food line and sit there and hold them while they're crying because they're not in their house. You don't have an 80-year-old come to your business because he's living in a mold-infested house. You don't have to do that. I do. John Bell does. Brent Jackson does. Buck Newton does. You don't. You say you care, but you certainly haven't shown it.
A brutal hearing in Raleigh yesterday. You can read more details. Brianna Kramer's got the story over at carolinajournal.com. And recapping our other top story this morning, Democrat incumbent Allison Riggs in the challenge for the North Carolina Supreme Court now leads Republican challenger Jefferson Griffin by 623 votes. We'll see if there's a recount possession put in a little bit later on today. We'll be tracking all of that over at carolinajournal.com. That's going to do it for the Carolina Journal News Hour. We are back tomorrow morning, 5 to 6 a.m. right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.